Hey, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Politically Incorrect Podcast. I'm Jim Williams, your host. There's been a great deal made out of the craziness that's gone on over the past month or so. And you had Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, and, of course, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell talking about how, crazy it's gotten from a standpoint of fearing for their lives and people taking to the streets in protest. I decided to talk about 1968. And 1968 was a whole different situation. Climate was much more radioactive on a political scale. And we literally did have people in the streets. And my guest, Evan Weiner, who joins us from time to time, Evan is a dear friend and someone who I've had the pleasure of working with a number of times. We're going to talk to you a little bit about 1968, when protests and things were going on that in no way, shape, or form does anything that we're doing right now come even close to that time in our history. It was a time when Robert Kennedy and, of course, Martin Luther King were assassinated within almost a month of each other. And just an amazing, amazing time in our history. So, Evan, without any further ado, it's great to have you on. As always, let's talk about 1968, not only from a political standpoint, but also from how journalism has changed from 1968 to 2018.
Yeah, it seems so. I give a lot of talks. I've given talks in the United States. I've given them on cruise ships around the world on the year 1968. And the world in 1968, what people forget, was that Charles de Gaulle fled France for 6 hours. France had no government for 6 hours when there was the major factory strike, which included also university student demonstrations against not only France, but against the Americans in Vietnam. And of course, France was in Vietnam before the Americans. Right. So people forget about that. People forget about the fact that the Khmer Rouge came together in Cambodia in 1968, and eventually that would be the killing fields. People forget about...
well, they were the Taliban before the Taliban. They were the Taliban and ISIS before the Taliban and ISIS existed.
Yeah, and can I use the word meddling without getting in trouble?
Sure, of course.
Oh, okay, because sometimes I'll use that word meddling in Soviet meddling. And certainly the Soviet Union had a long history of quote-unquote meddling going back to 1956 in Hungary when they invaded Hungary. And that played out again in 1968 when Czechoslovakia with Dubček and Svoboda decided to lighten the Soviet rules in Czechoslovakia, the Prague Spring. And by August 20th at 11 o'clock at night, whether you were in Prague or Bratislava, the Soviet tanks and aircraft rolled in, and that was the end of the Prague Spring. You had Chairman Mao in China at that point, and the little red book of Chairman Mao. And, of course, you had problems in Africa with South Africa and apartheid. A lot of things were going on, including Mexico City and the massacre in the center of Mexico City 2 weeks before the 1968 Olympics, which people remember for Tommy Smith and John Carlos, which just took place, the 50th anniversary a couple of nights ago. But before the Olympics...
Those, by the way, for those of you who are too young, is when they put the power sign by putting their fists in the air during the... during the flag raising ceremony at the Summer Games in Mexico City.
Yep.
Both were track stars, right?
Yeah, both were. That was the 200-meter race where they went to the podium, and it was the ultimate protest against the national anthem. But oddly enough, Tommy Smith ended up in the AFL next year, the American Football League, the year before the merger, and he played with the Cincinnati Bengals as a wide receiver for Paul Brown. And Paul Brown helped desegregate football back in 1946 with the Cleveland Browns when he brought in guys like Bill Willis and Marion Motley without any commotion because they were football players. And Paul Brown about 23 years later, hired Tommy Smith. And John Carlos also was drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles, never played with them because of an injury, and ended up playing with the Montreal Alouettes. And it's kind of interesting when you compare that to Colin Kaepernick and his protest.
Right.
Well, he had a protest, but I'm not sure his protest was on the scale of Tommy Smith and John Carlos. But
well, no, because the world got to see Tommy Smith and John Carlos, including a major cross section of the United States, where in the case of Kaepernick, all he did was kneel.
Yes, and nobody caught it the first two times he did it. It was in game 3 of the season, and a writer caught it. So it was unnoticed. But 2 weeks before the Olympics in Mexico City in October of '68, there was student demonstrations in the middle of the big square in Mexico City, and there was all sorts of shooting, and demonstrators were killed. And the Mexican government still, after 50 years, doesn't have its story straight. They initially said the demonstrators started shooting at the demonstrators, and the army came in and they started shooting. But that story officially has never been straight. But that was going on. That was what was going around the world. Soviet meddling all over the place. China probably meddling. North Korea seized a ship. The Pueblo in the early part of 1968, and technically we're still at war with North Korea. We had a truce in 1953, but only a truce. There's never been a treaty ending that war.
Right, and you've got the other situation. Yeah. Meanwhile, in the United States, you have Dr. King being assassinated in April. Then you get Bobby Kennedy assassinated right after the primary in California. You've got tanks and United States military in the streets. You've got the Democratic National Convention where Daley is in charge. Mayor Daley of Chicago is in charge, and Dan Rather gets tossed out of the out of the convention. I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah, well, the year starts in 1968 with Eartha Kitt being invited to the White House. Lady Bird Johnson, who's the first lady, Lyndon Johnson, the president. And for me, I'll say Lyndon Johnson, I know immediately, but I realize that most people have no idea who Lyndon Johnson is, believe it or not. But there was a luncheon on January 19th for successful women, and Eartha Kitt was invited. And Eartha Kitt at that time was playing Catwoman on Batman, and she had some major hits on radio, Santa Baby being one of them back in the day. And she went to the White House with the successful women, and as that was going on, there was a women's protest on the mall nearby. And Lyndon Johnson, the rumor was going to come down and greet the women too. I don't think he ever did, but Eartha Kitt went to Lady Bird Johnson and said to her face, "Why are we in Vietnam?" And that's how the year started out for Mrs. Johnson. And Eartha Kitt paid the price ultimately because she was blackballed from the entertainment industry by Lyndon Johnson, who made some phone calls, and she had to go to Europe to practice her craft for a bunch of years before coming back to the United States and being able to do her job, which was acting, performing, and singing. But that was, she went right to power. She told Lady Bird Johnson exactly what she thought. Meanwhile, outside the White House, up the mall a little bit, not right outside the White House, but near the mall, there was a women's march. They had about 5,000 women in the streets. Sisterhood is powerful. And they were protesting a number of things, including the Vietnam War and getting out of the Vietnam War. And also sisterhood is powerful, getting more rights for women. You got to understand in 1968, if a woman, and this is hard to believe for young people today and young women who might be listening, that in 1968, a woman could not get a credit card in the United States unless her father signed for it, her husband signed for it, her brother signed for it, or if she didn't have any of those, she had to have a guardian. I remember talking to Billie Jean King You know, of course, Billie Jean King.
Sure.
I know Billie Jean King, and she's well, I'll use a New York expression. She's a terrific woman, as you know and I know, and a civil rights pioneer, at least
Absolutely.
in my
Right.
But she was telling me that when she was against Bobby Riggs, when she was winning Wimbledon, the U.S. Open, that she couldn't open a credit card. She had to have her husband, Larry King, not the Larry King that we
Right, not the CNN or Mutual
yeah,
Broadcasting Larry.
not the guy who's never paid for a meal in his life.
Right.
But anyway, Larry King, her husband, had to. She's making all the money, right?
Right.
And she can't get a credit card. So there was also the bra burning and women's lib and all of that other stuff going on in 1968. And we haven't even begun to talk about the civil rights movement.
Right.
Dr. King was still alive. There were still demonstrations. And Dr. King would go to Memphis, where ultimately he was assassinated. And he would go to Memphis in support of the sanitation strike, which had started on Lincoln's birthday. February 12th of that year. And of course, he gave his I've Been to the Mountain speech on April 3rd, and he was killed on April 4th. Bobby Kennedy and James Brown, believe it or not, James Brown, are credited with calming tensions in Kennedy's case in Indianapolis and James Brown's in Boston. And Bobby Kennedy at a campaign rally was
Which,
the one.
By the way, they decided. At that time, remember Frank Mankiewicz, who was the campaign manager for Kennedy, said, don't go. And he did. I mean, to his credit, he went.
Yeah, and he gave a speech, and I'm not going to give the substance of the speech other than he talked about how a white man had also killed his brother. And that we had to get beyond that. And that was credited, or he was credited anyway, with keeping the peace in Indianapolis. Meanwhile, James Brown, the hardest working man in showbiz, right?
Right.
Was up in Boston at the Boston Garden. And James Brown gave a concert and was credited with calming tensions in Boston. James Brown's an interesting character. Many, many years ago, when Al Sharpton was hanging around Don King. It's got to be 30 years ago. I was once talking to Sharpton. I hate name dropping,
Yeah, right, exactly.
Here we go. And I was once talking to Sharpton back when, and he was telling me that, James Brown and Strom Thurmond were best buddies. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, they were best buddies. And one of Sharpton's first forays into politics was as James Brown's assistant. He also helped with James Brown's hair, he told me, that James Brown said, we're going to the Capitol. We're going to meet somebody. He says, well, who is it? Who is it? And he said, I'm not telling you who it is till we get there. And they get there, they walk into the Senate building, and James Brown talks to whoever he was talking to get up to where he was. And he said, didn't tell Al Sharpton. And they get up and they go into the building and they go into the back offices, and he's taking Sharpton with him, and he walks into the office. The secretary says, oh, Mr. Brown, Senator Thurmond is waiting for you. Step this way. And Al was saying, James Brown, Strom Thurmond, they're buddies, and they were buddies.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. So James Brown was credited with calming down Boston. And of course, RFK, we have a mutual friend, and he's going to love when we bring this up, Shelley Saltman. And RFK's final speeches he wrote on Shelley's desk in
Los Angeles. Right.
Yeah, because Andy Williams, who was Shelley's client at the time, and I believe Shelley at that by that
partner
point
too.
he's promoting the Andy Williams golf tournament, and Andy gave Shelley a call, and Andy was best buddies with Robert F. Kennedy. Gave Shelley a call and said, "Can we find a quiet place where Bobby could write his speeches?" And Shelley said, "My office is fine." And Shelley, of course, grew up in Boston and played football in the park with Teddy. Knew Jack, knew Bobby Kennedy, and he said, "Sure, I'll take care of that." And Robert Kennedy wrote his speeches, went down to the Ambassador Hotel, and Sirhan ultimately shot him, killed him. And Rosie Greer, who I think you know as well.
Yep.
Many years later.
And Rayford Johnson.
And Rayford Johnson. Many years later, I asked Rosie Greer, how'd you have the ability to knock the gun out of Sirhan's hand? He said, I have no idea. I just did.
And broke his arm.
Broke his arm. When you're 6'5", 290, and had played in the National Football League with the New York Football Giants at that point,
right,
and the Los Angeles Rams, and you're a member of the fearsome foursome, you could break somebody's arm doing that, and certainly he did. And I know he was impacted by that for many, many years. And the two assassinations, and of course, Shelley was involved with St. Patrick's Cathedral Memorial, and also the train trip down to from New York to Arlington. And of course, we had Richard Nixon. And Nixon gets the nomination in August of 1968. And he goes on to Laugh-In and utters the immortal words, "Suck it to me."
Right.
And Nixon changes the dynamics of campaigning, because nobody ever before that went on a comedy show as part of a campaign. And of course that spawned other things. Pat Paulson.
Right, by the way, for those of you too young to know, that was the top-rated television show. It was on NBC. It was in color, and it was Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. We'll be back with more of the Politically Incorrect podcast right after this. You know, I love books. I really do. And I would love to read books. But, man, I know you're just like me. Your schedule is so slammed that getting to read a book is just, it's tough. It's tough to do. Can't read anywhere near what you'd like to. And, you know, some great stuff is passing you by. Well, about 2 weeks ago, I decided to download the Blinkist app on my phone. And ladies and gentlemen, it is a game changer. Last week alone, I was able to read Rocket Man, which is a great story about Apollo 8 written by Robert Kurson. I read Chasing Hillary by Amy Shosak. It's a super book, folks. It's an insider's look into Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. I went old school and read a book called The Doomsday Machine, Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner by Daniel Ellsberg. And I also got in Alan Fisher's great book, Valley of Geniuses, about the people of Silicon Valley and how they changed the world. I know what you're saying. You're saying, wait a minute, Williams. You just told me that you didn't have time to read one book in a week, and you got through 4? Yeah, I'm telling you why. It's Blinkist. It is the app that will change the way you read or listen to books forever, okay? You can find over 2,500 best-selling nonfiction books distilled in a way that allows you to read or listen to them in just 15 minutes. That's right. Now, over 7 million people are using Blinkist every day to glean the insights they need to become better at everything. Okay? It's all there. It's all easy to do. Now, I've read classics like How to Win Friends and Influence People While Eating Breakfast. I listened to the Amazon current bestseller Fire and Fury Inside the Trump White House while I was writing my column about Donald Trump. It's that simple, folks. Blinkist is constantly curating and adding new titles from the best of lists so that you're always getting the most powerful ideas in a mobile format, okay? I'm proud to be one of the 7 million people using Blinkist to expand our mind 15 minutes at a time. So let me show you how we get started, all right? You ready? All right, here's how we go. For a limited time, the folks at Blinkist have a special offer for the audience who listens to this great podcast, the Politically Incorrect Podcast with Jim Williams, all right? All you have to do is go to Blinkist.com/Williams. That's Blinkist.com/my name to get that free trial. That's Blinkist, Blinkist.com/Williams. Blinkist.com, that's Blinkist.com/my last name Williams. And you get 7 free days to check out all of the wonderful titles on Blinkist. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, Once you download the app, once you try it, you're not going to want to ever give it up. But should you ever wish to cancel it, again, no hassle. You cancel anytime. It's free to cancel. No problem. But as I said before, go to Blinkist.com, BLINKIST.com/my last name Williams. Take the 7-day free trial, and I guarantee you, you're going to love it, and you're going to become a member of the 7 million people, myself included, who are part of the Blinkist family, expanding our minds 15 minutes at a time. Folks, I am not kidding you when I tell you that this is the most important election in generations. Now, y'all know that we've spent the last year introducing you to progressive candidates from Florida and California. Why? Because we need to take back the House in November. Many of those progressive candidates that have joined us right here on the Politically Incorrect podcast are men and women who are first-time candidates. Some of them have been gay and lesbians. Some have been black. Some have been Hispanic. They are progressive candidates that reflect the diversity of this country. And we have to take back the House. The Trump administration is waging war on women, the LGBTQ community, immigration, race relations, the poor, healthcare, and many other issues that affect our everyday lives. Now, I've been involved in politics for over 40 years. Other than voting, the most important thing you can do as a citizen to affect change is to volunteer. We need your help to return the party of Truman, Kennedy, Clinton, and Obama to take back the United States House of Representatives. Here are the numbers you need to know. Nationwide, there are 84 competitive races to win back the House. We need to flip 23 of them, all right? We're going to push hard to get all 84. But at the very least, we need to get those 23. So what can you do? Well, I'm proud to introduce you to my new sponsor, Swing Left. Now, what's Swing Left? It is a national grassroots organization focused on taking back the House in November's midterm elections. They connect people with things they can do that will have a direct impact on winning a progressive majority in the House and putting a check on the Trump administration and conservatives. This election season, our message is don't just vote this year, volunteer. I've done it through Swing Left, and it's free and easy. So far, nearly 500,000 people have volunteered to take action in the 2018 midterms with Swing Left, including me. When you join Swing Left, go to swingleft.org. That's swingleft.org/my name Williams. You'll immediately be connected with other volunteers in your area who are working to win races in nearby swing districts. You will find out where and how you can make a difference and impact the flipping of the House. And you got to start now because it is very important. But look, this is a very simple thing we're asking you to do, but it is a very, very important thing. Each of us has the power to change our country, save our democracy, but only if we do the work to take the House back, okay? Gang, we are getting down to crunch time. Trump and his conservative movement can be stopped before they do any more harm. But we have to get involved, okay? This is a turning point in U.S. history. It is worth our time. It is worth our energy. We need you to help. You can man call centers. You can pass out flyers. You can use your talents to help get candidates from diverse backgrounds that are running to save us from the Trump administration and his conservative cronies that have done so much damage so far. And trust me, folks, they are only in it for themselves. So here's what I need you to do. Go to swingleft.org. That's swingleft.org/Williams. Join me and other volunteers in your area who will be working to win races in nearby swing districts. And do it today. You got to do it today. Again, here's what I want you to do. Go to swingleft.org. swingleft.org/Williams. That's swingleft.org/Williams. Join our volunteer army, folks. We want to get the House back in the hands of progressives who will stop the Trump administration and the conservatives from doing any more harm. So I'm asking you, I'm begging you, do it today, because we have so very little time to affect the election in November. Thanks so much. Go to swingleft.org. That's swingleft.org/Williams. Do it now. The Politically Incorrect Podcast continues.
And the Smothers Brothers, who among their writers were a very young Rob Reiner and a very young Steve Martin, the Smothers Brothers were lampooning Johnson in the Vietnam War, Tommy Smothers, which ultimately cost them their career because they were thrown off the air in 1969 by CBS. And their career suffered. They never recovered from that. But on the Smothers Brothers show, you think Stephen Colbert is the first comedian ever to run for president? No. Pat Paulson did. See, everything new is everything old. And
he was a character on the Smothers Brothers show.
Yep, and he ran for president in 72 and 76 and 80, 84, 88. That was his joke, running for president. So everything old is new again. Although young people think that, oh wow, this is revolutionary. Comedians running for president, Stephen Colbert. Nope, been there, done that. So it was quite the year. And
we're not even talking about the Watts riots. And another dear friend of ours, Dick Schaap, was in Los Angeles covering a Dodgers game, and suddenly was thrust in the middle of reporting the riots in Watts.
Well, the other thing that I didn't talk about either was that we have mutual friend down in Alabama, in Daphne, the Rosenditch family, and I got an award from the college. I got 2 awards from the college down there, and the first time I went was in 2003, and I was driven out to Biloxi, Mississippi, because I had never been down on the Gulf Coast. And the person who was with me said, "Let's take a ride. We'll go down 90, and we'll go down 10, then we'll go on 90, and you can take a look at the Gulf Coast, which is beautiful, absolutely beautiful." And we were walking in Biloxi, Mississippi, on the beach. And there was a plaque in the middle of the beach in Biloxi, Mississippi. On this spot, the first African American was legally allowed to swim in Biloxi, Mississippi, or Biloxi as it's called there, in the Gulf of Mexico. 1968, first African American in the water in the Gulf of Mexico legally. Think of that, because it's 4 years after the Civil Rights Movement. And that was going on too, and there were the student demonstrations that shut down colleges, and we don't have any student demonstrations today that shut down colleges. Of course, what we have today is loads of rhetoric led by cable TV, and one of the things that always struck me was Walter Cronkite, and looking back at the 1968, because I do talks on this, and I've been doing talks on this for a year, and I've listened to the people in the audience. They have given me things I've added to the talk. In fact, this afternoon, I'm going down to Manhattan and giving the 1968 talk before a bunch of seniors who were there. But Cronkite, here's how far or how much we've lost, depending on your viewpoint in terms of news. When Cronkite was covering the Democratic,
we're now talking about Walter Cronkite, CBS anchor.
Yes, CBS.
Again,
anchor.
I'm giving points to make sure that people along the way know who we're speaking about. For many years, he was the most trusted man in broadcasting
in America. It dawned on me in 1999. I was giving a speech at Central Michigan University up in Mount Pleasant.
Yes.
Yeah, right in the middle of Michigan. That's why it's Central Michigan. I'm doing a talk on TV, and how Cronkite was the Bob Costas of his day, at least in 1960. He anchored the Olympics
convention.
coverage out
Right.
of
Yeah.
Lake Tahoe, Squaw Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about Walter Cronkite, and I looked around, and people were giving me quizzical looks. Now, these are kids that were born in 1981, 1980, 1979, 1978. And I'm talking about Cronkite as if they know who he is. And then it dawned on me that the freshmen in the class were being born as Walter was giving his last broadcast on CBS. And I said, you know, I'd better explain who Walter Cronkite is. And then it dawned on me, I'm explaining who Walter Cronkite is to these people. Boy, things change fast. But anyway, in '68 at the convention in Chicago, the Democratic National Convention, Rather is tossed out, as is Mike Wallace.
Right.
And Cronkite says, stepping out of the usual Walter Cronkite role, because Walter was the most trusted man in America because he dropped his glasses after he announced that Kennedy had died, dropped the glasses, shed a tear, the glasses went back on. And if you watch the CBS Evening News, you still see that in the opening, or at least the last time I watched it, I saw in the opening.
It's on YouTube for anybody who doesn't know. Yes.
Oh yeah, and Old Iron Pants, which was his nickname, Old Iron Pants was back in the saddle right after that, so he became the most trusted man on TV because he was able to shed a tear and then go right back to work. But anyway, he says after Mike Wallace, and Mike Wallace, of course, was on 60 Minutes for a long time. Chris Wallace's father. Yeah, we got to throw all these qualifiers in, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So Mike Wallace is thrown out of the amphitheater. Dan Rather's thrown out, bodily taken out, right? And Walter Cronkite says, "We have a bunch of thugs here. If I may be permitted to say so." And that always cracks me up because I can't imagine in the world of cable TV, the hypersensitive world of cable TV news today, anybody, whether it's somebody from MSNBC, somebody from CNN, somebody from Fox, I can't imagine any of them saying, "If I may be permitted to say so."
Right. Well,
and Cronkite is asking for your approval that he could say this, and it just cracks me up, in looking back at how prim and proper the news was.
Right, and the CBS cameras during that time were taking shots of Mayor Richard Daley, who was the host of this, and outside of the convention center, there was mass protests going on. And it was pretty much, you talk about a mob, this was not the mob that, these folks were talking about with the Kavanaugh situation. These are mobs that were seriously engaged in literal physical fights outside.
Yes. I was on a cruise ship in March, and there were 4 people from Chicago who were on that cruise ship. A woman who fled Czechoslovakia, another woman who was in the Hilton Hotel that overlooked where the main violence was taking place, another guy who was in the city, and another guy who was 16 years old who was upset because he couldn't use Grant Park because he wanted to play softball. And I looked at him, I said, "And you're the one who drinks Ham's beer." He said, "How'd you know?" I said, "I just had that sneaky suspicion you were a Ham's beer drinker." And I guess we got to explain Ham's beer.
I guess.
Which was a major regional beer back in the day in the Midwest. And Ham's Beer was the sponsor of Chicago White Sox and Cubs games and Blackhawks games. And Bobby Hull, who played with the Blackhawks at that time, was good friends with Pete Ham. And he used to tell me all about Pete Ham. I said, "Ham's Beer, that's all I know." He said, "Oh, Pete Ham was a great guy." But anyway, I believe it's still a regional beer, one of those boutique beers now in the Midwest.
Right, so microbrew now.
Yeah, microbrew. But the woman who was telling me, she was watching from one of the higher floors at the Hilton Hotel, and she said the demonstrators were there looking for a fight. Richard Daley, who told his police after Martin Luther King was killed that he didn't want the city's reputation sullied, to shoot to kill. Richard Daley's police were ready to go. Daley was paranoid because he thought the Yippies, remember the Yippies, Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman? He was kind of paranoid that he thought that Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman were going to get these big trucks loaded up with LSD and drop it into the Chicago water supply, and everybody in Chicago would be high as part of the protest.
And this is not joking, folks. This is not joking. It actually, again, historically, Daley thought that was going to happen.
Yeah, but if you throw LSD into the water, it probably would dilute the LSD.
Well, I don't even think that I don't know anyone in those days who were actually drinking it. It was an injectable drug.
Yeah. So anyway, he was. Nobody
said he was smart, just tough.
Yeah, but the point was that Daley didn't want anything to happen in the city. He told his cops, do whatever he can. They have to fight. The Chicago 8 were arrested. It became the Chicago 7 when Bobby Seale was separated from the others, and that was Abby Hoffman. That was Jerry Rubin. If you remember, Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin nominated a Pegasus, to run for president.
Right.
And they were arrested in Chicago a couple of days before the convention for disturbing the peace. Nobody knows what happened to Pegasus the pig. There are rumors that he was dinner that night in one of the Chicago police departments, and there are rumors that he was taken out to Iowa, where he lived out the rest of his life with Mrs. Pegasus. But they nominated a pig. And so, whatever is going on today, there are no demonstrations at colleges today. There's no Mark Rudd out there leading the Students for Democratic Society and shutting down Columbia University. There are no protests against the war, the Vietnam War at that time.
Or for that matter, taking over the president's office at the University of Wisconsin.
No. I mean, that's not happening on college campuses today.
Or thank God there's no shootings at on Ohio State's campus.
Yeah, well, that happened in 1970 at Kent State.
No, at Kent State, but right. But yeah, what I'm saying is at least it didn't happen. Yeah, now it hasn't happened.
Our old buddy Steve Albert was on the campus as the doing Kent State sports at the time as a student. I believe he was 20 years old at the time, and he once told me about being on campus when the shooting started, and of course that was in 1970 with James Rhodes. And also, you don't have political protest songs. There was a counterculture in those days. The counterculture was, of course, watching the Smothers Brothers, watching Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Although Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In was not exactly a show that wandered over into the area that Tommy Smothers did. They had some anti-war jokes, some political jokes, but the Smothers Brothers actually had the activists on, Pete Seeger, and they got in trouble with Pete Seeger because he sung the song Big Money, and CBS, Bill Paley, told them, Bill Paley, of course, who ran CBS, and a place where I speak in Teaneck, New Jersey. The guy's 93 years old. He always comes to see me speak, and he always tells me he was Bill Paley's accountant in the 1950s and how Bill Paley was a madman running CBS. And CBS told the Smothers Brothers, you could have Pete Seeger on, but you can't have him sing the Big Money song because the Big Money song was about being stuck in the mud. And it was a euphemism for Vietnam and Lyndon Johnson at that time. And Tommy Smothers told Pete Seeger, you must sing that song. And basically the poke his thumb in Bill Paley's face. Eventually, the show would have to go be vetted by CBS censors 10 days before air date. And they kept going. And Bill Paley decided after Richard Nixon got on his back that the Smothers Brothers weren't worth the effort, and they fired them. They didn't cancel the show. They fired the Smothers Brothers. Big difference there.
Right. And they're replaced by Glenn Campbell.
Glenn Campbell, in the Good Time Hour. And Glenn Campbell kept Steve Martin on as one of the people there. And, of course, the Smothers Brothers were the ones who put Glenn Campbell on. And
as a summer replacement.
As a summer replacement. And the odd thing about Glenn Campbell was he was 180 degrees opposite political philosophy than the Smothers Brothers and Rob Reiner and Steve Martin and all that. But, the show must go on, right? And people could be friends. even though they were on the other ends of the spectrum. They could be friends at that point. But that was 1968, and I do talk about it. And the year ends with people circling the moon, Frank Borman and Bill Anders and Jim Lovell. And they read from Genesis, basically saying the earth is good on Christmas Eve. And we got to see, as a society, as a civilization, and I think our buddy Richard Hall, Dick Hall, was part of that because he worked for NASA and video at that point, and we got to see the Earth rise, and we got to see shots that we had never seen before from outer space of the Earth, which was 250,000 miles away. And they read from the Bible and basically say the world is good, and the year ends, and Richard Nixon becomes president. Lyndon Johnson, of course, did not run for re-election. Some people say that Cronkite had such a role in Johnson not running for re-election because he did the TV show Report from Vietnam in February of 1968 and concluded that Americans couldn't win Vietnam. The best we could do was a stalemate. The historian David Halberstam claimed that when Johnson saw that, he said, "I lost Johnson. I've lost America," and didn't run for re-election. But a guy that we both knew, Larry O'Brien, I knew him, of course, from being the commissioner of the National Basketball Association. I once asked O'Brien about that. He said it was a wives' tale, urban myth, that he doubted that Walter Cronkite's report, while hurting Johnson, would have made him go over the top and say, "I'm not running for re-election." And Johnson's thing was March 31st. Cronkite's report was February 27th, so it was a whole month in between. And I even forgot about the Democrats. They were running Gene McCarthy, who is anti-war candidate. George Wallace was running, basically on states' rights and also an anti-civil rights platform. Bobby Kennedy got in the race rather late. I mean, think of this. He got in the race March 16th, 1968. There are people out there who this weekend are fanning across the country, a little more than 2 years before the next election, that are staking out high ground so they could run for president 2 years in advance. And Bobby Kennedy got in the race in March, which is the third month of the year. And he had,
4 months before the convention.
Yeah, 4 months. Yeah. So had he lived, he would have had 7 months to run. 7 months. And that was his campaign, 7 months to run. And now you start running the day after, literally the day after the presidential election of that year. So quite the difference. And in terms of differences, there are quite a few differences between now and then. And there is a link between John Carlos, Tommy Smith, and Colin Kaepernick, and that's Harry Edwards. I don't know if you've ever met Harry Edwards.
Yeah.
He's from Berkeley, the sociologist.
Yeah.
And one day, Harry said to me, we're in Indianapolis at the NFL scouting combine, and he looks at me and he says, "Why don't you join me for breakfast?" And I look at Harry, who's 6'9", weighs about 300 pounds, and I said, "Why not?" And Harry and I had a long discussion. But Harry, back in 1967, organized the Olympic Athletes for Human Rights group, of which Tommy Smith was a member, of which John Carlos wasn't a member, but Tommy Smith was. And Peter Norman got involved and helped that ceremony up when Smith and Carlos. Smith wins the gold, Carlos the bronze, and Peter Norman, the Australian, wins the silver medal. Yeah. And he suggested to them to split the gloves, and they do the what is perceived as a Black Power salute, which Brent Musburger didn't like and wrote about it in the Chicago American the next day. And Brent has never faced either Tommy Smith or John Carlos face to face. Always runs away when he sees them. But we'll talk about Musburger another time. Anyway, so they're there. Harry hiding them. And Harry, who was a consultant for the San Francisco 49ers, and still is, consulted Colin Kaepernick and told him what to expect. So he is the link between Smith and Carlos and Kaepernick. Mm-hmm. And Smith and Carlos never really were blackballed. They were thrown out of the Olympic Village, but they never lost their medals. Mm-hmm. They've gone on. Smith is an educator. Carlos is an educator. They're not particularly close, either one of them. And I was watching ESPN yesterday. I was on the exercise bike at the gym, and they were doing ESPN, the Beyond the Lines, right? That's what it's called, right. Which is, to me, the only show I could watch on ESPN. But
our buddy Bob Lee and Jeremy Schaff.
Bob Lee, who was pre-law
general
at university. Yeah, he was a pre-law student. I got to spend lots of time with Bob Lee in the 1980s. Really smart and sharp guy. And if there's a guy who's perfect for that show, it's Bob, because Bob knows what's going on.
And Jeremy.
And Jeremy. Well, I know Jeremy Schaff as well. But no, that was a perfect vehicle for Bob, actually. And all those years he was doing other things. And we were together during the USFL NFL trial, which was, about 2 months back in 1986. And I spent every day with him.
Bob and I share an Emmy together. So.
Oh, there you go. So we both know Bob and think very highly of Bob.
Of course, he's the best writer I ever met.
Although the beard should go.
That's true.
the beard should go. But anyway, getting back to Bob, and he's out right now. So whoever was doing the interview with Tommy Smith, hey, look, we made a political statement trying to draw attention to something. Mm-hmm. We were there during the national anthem. We stood there quietly during the national anthem protesting, as did Kaepernick, as did Eric Reed, as did a whole bunch of other things. But it seems that the anthem thing has disappeared. Kaepernick, of course, is still out of the NFL. He's got the grievance. But the odd thing is that the Kaepernick protest actually ensnared career politician Mary Bono, who was supposed to run USA Gymnastics on an interim basis and clean up all the problems over there. And there was no Twitter in 1968, obviously. There's no internet in 1968. The internet started in 1969 as a Pentagon initiative to get word out to Vietnam to their commanders and back to find out what was going on. That was the first use of the internet. And Mary Bono put up a picture. She had the Nike gear, whatever it was, sneakers or whatever, and she looked at it and didn't like that it was Nike, but she took out a magic marker or a Sharpie and decided to cover over the Nike logo. And
the swoosh.
The swoosh, and put it out on a tweet and never took it down. And some of the Olympians and the gymnasts caught it. And that was her first mistake. The other one, I don't think that you could complain about. But anyway, she was protesting Kaepernick. The other one was she worked at a law firm which actually hid what Larry Nassar did, or obstructed justice, or obstructed with Larry Nassar and the sexual abuse charges. I don't think you could hold her for that, because she happened to be working for a law firm that happened to do that. But it was stupid. I can't imagine. Can you imagine Richard Nixon on Twitter?
No.
I can't imagine Richard Nixon on Twitter, or LBJ on Twitter.
I could imagine him, because he was very outspoken.
The fireside chat.
Yeah, he would have actually probably enjoyed it. But just before we put a button on this, one of the things about Johnson was he probably was one of the most astute politicians in history. And as 68 moved around, as many people remember, of course, that because first there was the Voting Rights Act in 64, and then 65 came the
civil rights came in
civil rights first, 64, right? 65, right? Right. I got them backwards. Johnson had expended a tremendous amount of political capital in doing that, because he knew that Democrats were going to get crushed
for generations,
in the South specifically. Turned a lot of Democrats into Republicans, Strom Thurmond being one of them. I think at the end of 1968, he read the tea leaves and realized, you know what, I'm going to go into what should be a re-election with at least 4 or 5 people who are going to enter the race and try to basically unseat a sitting president. So I think that Johnson, being the political savvy person that he was, decided that, you know what, I was president, and it's better to get out before the potential of being one of the few presidents in history that would have been primaried.
Well, he was primaried with Gene McCarthy.
Right. But what I'm saying is he basically, it's not uncommon for one person to run against a sitting president. It's just what I'm saying is I think he put his foot in the, tested the waters, and being this politically savvy guy said, you know what, I'm not going to win this.
Yeah. And, and the funny thing is, and Cronkite interviewed him a couple of years. He didn't live too long after he left the office, but Cronkite interviewed him. And one thing, if you go up on YouTube and look at Lyndon Johnson, which is striking, was his hair. His hair, the back of his head, his hair was long. And the theory was he wanted to have some solidarity with the protesters at that point, that whether he got inner peace or whatever with the war and all, but he had longer hair than he ever did as president or vice president or in the Senate. So that was kind of interesting when you see that interview that Cronkite did with him. And Lyndon left. What was his record? Well, Vietnam brought everything down, of course. He also told Nixon to tape all of his conversations in the White House.
Yeah.
So in a sense, we might have Lyndon Johnson to thank for bringing down Richard Nixon because of the tapes inside of the Oval Office. He did a lot of good things. Nixon also did a lot of good things, but ultimately Nixon would go down because he was so paranoid, and he bugged Larry O'Brien's office. I once asked him why. Larry O'Brien said, "Why did he do it?" He said, "I don't know. We didn't have anything worthwhile for him, but the Nixon people did." And small-time burglary basically turned into the overturning of a president.
Okay, let's talk about your social media and how people can get in touch with you.
It's Evan Weiner, Facebook, Evan J. Weiner on Twitter, and on LinkedIn, Evan Weiner. And I got the 8 books. You look them up on Apple and all the other e-book sites. And got some speeches coming up for the public on November 8th. I'm in Ramsey, New Jersey, talking about what we just talked about, 1968, early days of TV. Fair Lawn, New Jersey. That's in November 15th. And then we pick up the libraries again in January, talking about the Super Bowl, and the Super Bowl more than just a game. The Super Bowl is a cultural institution and has changed some laws in the United States. And the Super Bowl is the product of the Jim Crow era. But you got to come, or we'll talk about that on another show.
Many thanks, Evan Weiner, for joining us and talking about 1968. We'll be back with more of the Politically Incorrect podcast right after this. Folks, I am not kidding you when I tell you that this is the most important election in generations. Now, y'all know that we've spent the last year introducing you to progressive candidates from Florida and California. Why? Because we need to take back the House in November. Many of those progressive candidates that have joined us right here on the Politically Incorrect podcast are men and women who are first-time candidates. Some of them have been gay and lesbians. Some have been black. Some have been Hispanic. They are progressive candidates that reflect the diversity of this country. And we have to take back the House. The Trump administration is waging war on women, the LGBTQ community, immigration, race relations, the poor, healthcare, and many other issues that affect our everyday lives. Now, I've been involved in politics for over 40 years. Other than voting the most important thing you can do as a citizen to affect change is to volunteer. We need your help to return the party of Truman, Kennedy, Clinton, and Obama to take back the United States House of Representatives. Here are the numbers you need to know. Nationwide, there are 84 competitive races to win back the House. We need to flip 23 of them, all right? We're going to push hard to get all 84. But at the very least, we need to get those 23. So what can you do? Well, I'm proud to introduce you to my new sponsor, Swing Left. Now, what's Swing Left? It is a national grassroots organization focused on taking back the House in November's midterm elections. They connect people with things they can do that will have a direct impact on winning a progressive majority in the House and putting a check on the Trump administration and conservatives. This election season, our message is don't just vote this year, volunteer. I've done it through Swing Left, and it's free and easy. So far, nearly 500,000 people have volunteered to take action in the 2018 midterms with Swing Left, including me. When you join Swing Left, go to swingleft.org. That's swingleft.org/my name, Williams. You'll immediately be connected with other volunteers in your area who are working to win races in nearby swing districts. You will find out where and how you can make a difference and impact the flipping of the House. And you got to start now because it is very important. But look, this is a very simple thing we're asking you to do, but it is a very, very important thing. Each of us has the power to change our country, save our democracy, but only if we do the work to take the House back, okay? Gang, we are getting down to crunch time. Trump and his conservative movement can be stopped before they do any more harm. But we have to get involved, okay? This is a turning point in U.S. history. It is worth our time. It is worth our energy. We need you to help. You can man call centers. You can pass out flyers. You can use your talents to help get candidates from diverse backgrounds that are running to save us from the Trump administration and his conservative cronies that have done so much damage so far. And trust me, folks, they are only in it for themselves. So here's what I need you to do. Go to swingleft.org. That's swingleft.org/Williams. Join me and other volunteers in your area who will be working to win races in nearby swing districts. And do it today. You got to do it today. Again, here's what I want you to do. Go to swingleft.org/Williams. That's swingleft.org/Williams. Join our volunteer army, folks. We want to get the House back in the hands of progressives who will stop the Trump administration and the conservatives from doing any more harm. So I'm asking you, I'm begging you, do it today because we have so very little time to affect the election in November. Thanks so much. Go to swingleft.org. That's swingleft.org/Williams. Do it now. You know, I love books. I really do. And I would love to read books. But man, I know you're just like me. Your schedule is so slammed that getting to read a book is just, it's tough. It's tough to do. Can't read anywhere near what you'd like to. And, you know, some great stuff is passing you by. Well, about 2 weeks ago, I decided to download the Blinkist app on my phone. And ladies and gentlemen, it is a game changer. Last week alone, I was able to read Rocket Man, which is a great story about Apollo 8 written by Robert Kurson. I read Chasing Hillary by Amy Chosak. It's a super book, folks. It's an insider's look into Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. I went old school and read a book called The Doomsday Machine, Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner by Daniel Ellsberg. And I also got in Alan Fisher's great book, Valley of Geniuses, about the people of Silicon Valley and how they changed the world. I know what you're saying. You're saying, wait a minute, Williams. You just told me that you didn't have time to read one book in a week and you got through 4? Yeah, I'm telling you why. It's Blinkist. It is the app that will change the way you read or listen to books forever, okay? You can find over 2,500 best-selling nonfiction books distilled in a way that allows you to read or listen to them in just 15 minutes. That's right. Now, over 7 million people are using Blinkist every day to glean the insights they need to become better at everything. Okay? It's all there. It's all easy to do. Now, I've read classics like How to Win Friends and Influence People While Eating Breakfast. I listened to the Amazon current bestseller Fire and Fury Inside the Trump White House while I was writing my column about Donald Trump. It's that simple, folks. Blinkist is constantly curating and adding new titles from the best of lists so that you're always getting the most powerful ideas in a mobile format, okay? I'm proud to be one of the 7 million people using Blinkist to expand our mind 15 minutes at a time. So let me show you how we get started, all right? You ready? All right, here's how we go. For a limited time, the folks at Blinkist have a special offer for the audience who listens to this great podcast, the Politically Incorrect Podcast with Jim Williams, all right? All you have to do is go to Blinkist.com/Williams. That's Blinkist.com/my name to get that free trial. That's Blinkist, Blinkist.com/Williams. Blinkist.com, that's Blinkist.com/my last name Williams. And you get 7 free days to check out all of the wonderful titles on Blinkist. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, once you download the app, once you try it, you're not going to want to ever give it up. But should you ever wish to cancel it, again, no hassle. You can cancel anytime. It's free to cancel. No problem. But as I said before, go to Blinkist.com, Blinkist.com/my last name Williams. Take the 7-day free trial, and I guarantee you're going to love it, and you're going to become a member of the 7 million people, myself included, who are part of the Blinkist family, expanding our minds 15 minutes at a time. Everybody, welcome back. Now, if you're not one of the over 50,000 people who subscribe to the Politically Incorrect Podcast, well, first of all, shame on you. Second of all, we certainly make it easy. All you have to do is go to the Apple Podcast Store. That's right. We're part of the Apple Podcast family and happy to be there. So go to iTunes and check that out. You can find us at Blog Talk Radio. You can find us at Google Play. We are on Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, as well as TuneIn. So that's 9 different places, plus another, certainly 20 or 30 more. So just search the Politically Incorrect Podcast with Jim Williams. Hit your favorite button, and each week we'll have a new edition of the show coming to you right to your phone or to your tablet or to both. Okay, so go out there and subscribe to us today. We would greatly appreciate it. Special thanks again to our guests this week. And that, of course, is Evan Weiner, talking about 1968 and the cultural climate at that point in time, as well as how journalism has changed over the years since then. So until next week, as we get ready for the midterms, we'll be just 1 week away as we talk to you next time with Alan Steinberg, and we break down what's going to happen in the midterms next time, right here on the Politically Incorrect Podcast. I'm Jim Williams for the entire team here, thanking you, and have a wonderful and safe week.